Hi friends, we have in the previous lecture did the basics of the winds. Now coming to the next topic, that will be starting with the wind system. I will just give you a brief idea how our lectures in the winds will progress. We will do first the classification of the winds. In the classification means the winds will be divided into the permanent winds, local winds and the seasonal winds. In the permanent winds there are numerous types of winds such as trade winds, westerlies, etc. And in the local winds there are some of the winds which are there in the local areas. Classify local winds or describe some of the local winds is one of the most common type of question in the geography mains examination in the GS geography. So you can get a question directly that what do you mean by local winds and give an example of some of the local winds in the world. The second classification after doing the winds, that is after doing the winds we will study the permanent winds, seasonal winds and the local winds. After studying this three kind of a wind system, we will study shifting of wind belts, which are related only to the permanent winds. Then we will study tricellular circulation of the atmosphere. So this tricellular circulation of the atmosphere is basically a three-cell model of an atmospheric pressure, but though it is not directly related, though the question, there are very few chances of the question being directly asked on the tricellular meridional circulation, but still you should know it because the question can be in the preliminary examination, or the more important, you should know it for knowing the jet streams. So this is how we are going to progress in our lecture. Now this, as you must have seen, the topic name for this lecture series is permanent winds. So here we are going to study the permanent winds and the seasonal winds. Then the next topic I will take it separately as a local wind, because it is a very important topic both for preliminary examination and for the mains examination. Then we will study shifting of the wind belts, then tricellular circulation, and lastly we will study the jet streams. Okay, so before we progress, I will again revise what we have studied in the winds. We have studied that the winds blow from high pressure region to a low pressure region. And how is pressure? Pressure is inversely related to temperature. This we have studied. That means we can say the wind blows from the colder areas to the warmer areas, or the winds are blowing from the high pressure to the low pressure. Second, we have studied the Coriolis force. What is this Coriolis force? It is a deflection force due to the rotation of the earth. This force says that winds. Now this force, before I progress, this force is applicable not only to the winds, this force is applicable to each and every moving object. That is, even if you launch a missile, the missiles will deflect to the right in the northern hemisphere and they will deflect to the left in the southern hemisphere. This force is applicable even to the ocean currents. Force is applicable to any moving object. So what does this force say? Is it a real kind of a force or is it an apparent force? See, this Coriolis force is an imaginary force, in the sense that when you launch a missile, when you see the wind, you will feel that it is deflecting. Now the actual deflection does not happen. The deflection is due to the difference in the rotational speed of the earth. The rotational speed of the earth being maximum at the equator and minimum at the poles, there is a time lag, or there is a lag between the two places at the same latitude, one on the equator and on the poles. As a result of this, there is a deflection which occurs. So we feel that, so you just remember, it is an imaginary force which is applicable to all moving objects, which say any moving object, and here because we are doing winds, which says winds deflect to right in north hemisphere, and the winds deflect to left in southern hemisphere. So this, you remember, winds will deflect to the right in the northern hemisphere. If the wind, this is the direction of the wind, wind won't flow directly, wind will deflect to the right in the northern hemisphere. If the wind is flowing this from here to here, it won't flow directly like this. The wind will deflect to the left. See, the left of northern hemisphere is this way. It will deflect to the left in the southern hemisphere. So this is what is the Coriolis force. Now after that, we will study the classification of the winds. Climate is, or study of a climatology, though it is easy for us as a students of climatology because we are studying from the general studies point of view or from civil services point of view, but actually how does the climate work, how the climate functions, and the mechanisms of climatology is tough. It is after the advent of these satellites and all, our information technology, still we cannot predict the monsoon very properly because the climatology is a very, very complex mechanism. It involves difference in the global pressure, it involves difference in the local pressure, it involves difference in the regional pressure, temperature, humidity, etc. All this comes and plays the role in the climatology. So this combining, we require super computers to predict proper monsoon, that too if the model, our monsoon model is perfect. And therefore generally it is seen that whenever in fact not only the Indian Meteorological Department but even the SkyMet could not predict this year's monsoon very, very properly. So sometimes the weather report is there won't be rainfall and suddenly there is a rainfall, or the weather report says the bright shiny day or rainy day and there is a bright shiny day, and vice versa, anything can happen. So this is because the climate is an extremely complex mechanism. Now in this complex mechanism there are different types of winds. Some winds are there blowing all over the world, some winds are there which are concentrated only in the region, some winds are there which are concentrated only in the seasons. And based on this, our brief classification of the winds is, the winds can be classified into permanent winds, seasonal winds, and lastly the local winds. So these three are the basic classification of the winds: seasonal winds, permanent winds, and the local winds. Now coming to what does this mean, that is, what are the permanent winds? What you will call as a permanent wind? The wind which blows in the same direction throughout the year all over the world or covering large part of the globe are known as permanent winds. Seasonal winds, these winds change their direction according to the seasons. These are the seasonal winds. The winds which blow in a one small localized area are known as local winds. So the winds are classified into permanent, which means you can write down the definition and I will give you some of the examples. These winds blow in same direction throughout the year. Winds blow in the same direction throughout the year. They blow over the larger areas of the globe. They blow over the larger areas of the world. The seasonal winds are the winds which change their direction as per the seasons. These winds change their direction as per the seasons. So the winds which do not have a constant direction, which change their direction as per the seasons, are known as seasonal winds, while the local winds are the winds which blow in particular locality or in the particular region. These are winds blowing in a particular region. So these are the winds which blow in the particular region, are known as local winds. That means the wind is a bigger concept, out of which the bigger concept lies the smaller concept of permanent winds. Some permanent winds may be seasonal, some may not be seasonal, but this is a smaller concept. And some local winds are seasonal, while some local winds are not seasonal, but they do have no relation to the we can say, permanent winds. So this bigger winds, smaller, inside this seasonal, and the smallest is the local winds. Now tell me, our life, that is in India, our life depends on one particular type of a wind. If that wind fails, it results into destruction of Indian economy, or it adversely, I cannot say destruction, but it adversely affects the Indian economy. It also determines, if it is an election year and if there is a failure of that particular kind of a wind, it may sound as a bad signal, or it may give bad result to the ruling government, and also it hampers our by rising the levels of inflation. Inflation matlab महंगाई. By rising the levels of inflation, it also affects our daily needs. What is that kind of a wind? Or what does India depend on? India depends on, you must be rightly thinking, India depends on the monsoon type of a climate. Now monsoon is which kind of a wind? Is it a local wind? Is it a seasonal wind, or is it a permanent wind? Can we call monsoon as a permanent wind? No. Monsoon cannot be a permanent wind, because we have only 6 months there is a rainfall, 6 months there is a no rainfall. So it cannot be a permanent wind. That means the monsoon wind does not blow constantly and see, what is the definition of a permanent wind? Winds blow in the same direction throughout the year. Monsoon, when we'll study the Indian monsoons, they do not blow in the same direction throughout the year. Second, is it a local wind? Can we say Indian subcontinent as a local region? No, it is a huge region. So it may be a regional wind, but it is not a local wind. So that means it is not a local wind. Monsoon is an example of a seasonal wind. What do you mean by the word monsoon? Monsoon means any kind of a wind which changes their direction by at least 180 degree. So whenever there is a change in the direction of a wind, it is known as a monsoon wind. But how much? At least 180 degree change in the direction. So in India, we have at one time we have the winds which come from the sea towards the land as southwest monsoon, while on other times we have the winds which go from land towards the sea as the northeast monsoon. So these are the two types of wind. The red color arrow is the summer season, and whenever these winds, because they are blowing from sea towards the land, that is from the sea, either from Arabian Sea or Bay of Bengal, or we can say from the Indian Ocean to the land, they bring moisture along with them, giving rainfall. But this blue color winds which blow from land towards the sea, obviously these are dry winds because land pe pani nahi hai, pani is there only in the oceans. So therefore these winds which blow from land towards the sea are dry winds, and we do not have rainfall. In fact, they originate in the higher latitudes, and this is the region when we experience winter. So today, as of now, I don't know when exactly you will be watching the lecture, but in the month of November, we are under the influence of northeast monsoon, that is, which originates here. We'll come to that later on in the while doing the Indian geography. So what is the seasonal winds? Seasonal winds, the example is monsoon. Local winds, there are numerous local winds. They are having different examples which we are doing, which we are going to do as a separate topic. So the local winds, I will give you some of the examples are land and sea breeze, Chinook, Mistral, etc. These are numerous. There are numerous local winds, and the permanent winds we are already going to do. Yesterday, when I drew a diagram in the previous lecture, you must have seen how the diagram looked. Trade winds, westerlies. See, they are blowing all over the parts of the world. So these are the known as permanent winds. Permanent winds are in the form of trade winds, in the form of westerlies, in the form of polar easterlies. So these are the three types of wind, and looking at the importance of this topic, I think it is one of the most important topic in the climatology, that is the wind classification of the wind system and also the wind system. You have potential for a separate question from the local winds in both preliminary examination, in the mains examination. Obviously, monsoon is one of the most important part of geography. So I don't have to tell you how important is the monsoon. And here also they can ask you. In fact, in this year's preliminary exam itself, there was a question in the form of a permanent winds, in the form of westerlies. So westerlies, trade winds, or the question can be directly classify the winds into different parts. So we will first start with now the permanent winds. What is the definition of a permanent winds? The winds which blow constantly, or more or less, you better write constantly, regularly, from high pressure belts to low pressure belts all over the world are permanent winds. Are the permanent winds. the direction of these winds remains more or less constant throughout the year. So these are the winds which are having constant direction throughout the year. The winds which blow regularly from high pressure belts to the low pressure belts all over the world are permanent winds whose direction remains more or less constant throughout the year. Now I will come to the, now look here, you can, before I start teaching you or I start writing on the board, I will try to explain you how exactly the mechanism works. What we have studied in the previous lecture is there is a equatorial low pressure belt, there is subtropical high pressure belt, there is subpolar low pressure belt, there is polar high pressure belt. That means there is equatorial low pressure belt, there is subpolar low pressure belt. These are the two low pressure belts. Then we have subtropical high, we have polar high. So this is the basic definition of the basic pressure belts. Now looking at, I am taking here only one side, that is if we consider from 0 degree equator to 30 degrees to 60 degree and to the polar region, that is 90 degree north. If we are considering only north hemisphere, the same will apply to the southern hemisphere also. That means we have a low pressure belt over here, we have high pressure belt, we have low pressure belt, and we have high pressure belt. Already we have done which is thermal, which is dynamically induced, why there is a different, why the world is divided into 7 different pressure belts. Now you know one thing, that the wind blows from high pressure belt to the low pressure belt because of the height. But how the mechanism is, we will look into this. Now see the winds which rise here, the winds which rise here in the on the equatorial low pressure belt, they go upwards, and after going upwards they are deflected into two sides, that is either on the both sides of the equator. One goes to the northern hemisphere, the other goes to the southern hemisphere. Are you getting this? The wind is moving upwards, and that is why we are calling this as a low pressure belt. That is, the wind is rising upwards. Now the wind, after crossing some distance, it becomes cold and becomes heavy, and due to the rotation of the earth, the wind starts sinking. At which belt it starts sinking? Now it starts sinking at the subtropical high pressure belt. So rising up of the winds here create a low pressure belt, while the sinking down of the winds here create an high pressure belt. And what does our concept say, or what does our knowledge say? On the surface, the winds will blow from high pressure to the low pressure. Therefore, the winds blows from this 30° north to the equator. I am showing the surface winds as in the black color. So on the surface winds, we have winds which blow from 30° north to towards the equator. And this surface winds, after going to the equator, they get heated up, rise again, and thus completes one continuous cell. So what we have the winds which blow from 30° north towards the equator. That means we have the winds which blow from subtropical high pressure belt towards the equator. So this, but now already we have studied the Coriolis force. The Coriolis force says that wind cannot travel in the straight line. It has to get deflected to the right hand side in the northern hemisphere and to the left hand side in the southern hemisphere. As a result of this, see the direction of arrow. Direction of arrow is pointing this way towards the front side. So the right side is this side. As a result, the winds will blow from subtropical high pressure belt in this manner. So similarly, in the southern hemisphere, the wind should go from subtropical high pressure belt towards the equatorial low, but wind in the southern hemisphere will deflect to the left. If I am facing this way, this is my left hand, so the winds will deflect to the left. This winds will deflect to the left. Now these winds, because they are blowing from northeast, this is north side, this is south, this is east, and this is west. Because they are blowing from the northeast direction to the southwest direction in the northern hemisphere, and also from the southeast direction to the northwest direction in the southern hemisphere, therefore we are saying that the name of the winds are based on the direction of their origin, not on the direction where they are reaching, but the direction of their origin. So obviously the direction of the origin here is on the eastern side, maybe northeast in the northern hemisphere or southeast in the southern hemisphere. Therefore these winds are known as easterly winds. These winds are known as easterly winds. And during the older times, if we look at the map of the world, I'll just draw Africa and the remaining during the older days, this belt was one of the major important trade routes, because shipping was one of the important trade routes. On the southern side also, this belt was one of the most important trade routes, that is the equator and around the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. So the ships which used to originate in England, their direction used to be determined by the winds which blow, that is the easterly winds. The route of navigation, the route of ships, the speed of the ships, etc. used to be determined by the direction by the intensity of these winds, that is these easterly winds, and therefore these easterly winds are also known as trade winds. Why the trade winds? Because remember, during the older days, it was the wind which used to sail the ships, because there was absence of motorized ships. So as a result of this, these are known as easterly winds or trade winds. Now what can we say about the trade winds? The trade winds blow from subtropical high pressure belt to the equatorial low pressure belt in both the hemispheres. They originate on the northeastern side in the northern hemisphere and southeast in the southern hemisphere, therefore known as easterlies. During the older times, they used to help in the determination of trade routes, and therefore they are known as trade winds. Now these two trade winds, that is both these are, now what will be the nature of these trade winds? Will it be cold winds or will they be hot winds? They originate near 30 degree latitude. Now what is they originate and they flow between 30 degree latitudes towards the equator. What is the type of a climate in this region? Is it cold or is it warm climate? It is a warm climate. So obviously these are warm winds. Now how they will behave, I will take it while doing the trade winds as a separate topic. Now this is just to give you entire idea of the wind system. Now these trade winds, as you can see, they come together at the equatorial low pressure belt, that is here. They come together and then they rise upwards. How they come together? One wind is coming from the north hemisphere, the other wind is coming from the southern hemisphere. So from the north hemisphere one wind is coming, and from the southern hemisphere the other wind is coming, and they rise upwards. After rising upwards, that means they converge together, they come together at a zone which, in the previous lecture we did, is a belt of calm or a doldrums. And because this zone lies in the tropical region, one reason, this zone lies in the tropical region. Which zone? The coming together of trade winds, one from the northern hemisphere, the other from the southern hemisphere. This zone lies in the tropical region. Second, there is a convergence of wind in the tropical region. Therefore, this area is also known as intertropical convergence zone or ITCZ. That is, this ITCZ is nothing but the belt of convergence of trade winds or the belt of doldrum. It is a low pressure belt where the trade winds converge. Converge means come together. Why intertropical? Because it lies between the tropics. So intertropical convergence zone is the zone of convergence of a trade wind. Or in the physical terms, or in the geographical terms, not physical terms. In the geographical terms, it is the thermal equator. What do you mean by thermal equator? There is a physical equator where there is exactly is at the center of the earth. But the behavior of the winds, the behavior of the pressure belts, if you remember in the previous lecture, I said the pressure belts keep on shifting. When they are to the northern hemisphere, all the pressure belts move to the north hemisphere except for the polar high pressure belt. When they are in the southern hemisphere, when the sun is in the southern hemisphere, all the pressure belts move to the south hemisphere except for polar high pressure belts. So this area, that means this central zone, this thermal equator means as per the temperature. What is an equator? Physical equator is the center of the earth. What is the thermal equator? Where there is high humidity throughout the year. Now this thermal equator keeps on shifting to the north or to the south as per the northward or southward movement of the sun. That is ITCZ, intertropical convergence zone, shifts to the north if the sun is in the north, shifts to the south if the sun is in the south. And the shifting of this ITCZ plays a very, very important role in the Indian monsoon. That is, there is a shifting of ITCZ. So this is how there is a trade wind. So what we have studied in the trade wind, before I again go into detail, we have studied their direction, we have studied the ITCZ. Now, we also know that the winds after descending from here, there is a low pressure belt which is created, that this high pressure belt is created because of the coming down of the winds. The winds after coming down here, they will flow as a surface winds and they will go towards the 60° north latitude and then rise upwards. That is, when the wind is flowing from subtropical high pressure belt to the to the equatorial low pressure belt, there also should be a wind system which is flowing from subtropical high pressure belt to the subpolar low pressure belt, that is from here to here. Now, how does it flow? It flows in this way, that is the wind which comes down from here. Now, we already know that the wind is coming down from here, the wind comes down, settles, and then it flows towards in this direction, from subtropical high to the subpolar low pressure belt in this direction, in both the hemispheres. And then the wind again rises upwards and it completes the second cell. The wind rises upwards and completes the second cell. Now, coming to this wind, that is the second wind. This is the first wind which we have studied. Coming to the second wind. Now, this also wind originates. Where does it originate? In the subtropical high pressure belt. And this wind flows towards the subpolar low pressure belt. Now, such kind of a wind which flows from subtropical high pressure belt to the subpolar low pressure belt, what will be the direction of this wind? What does the Coriolis force say? Coriolis force says that the wind should deflect to the right hand side. Now, look at the direction of this arrow. Where is the direction? Direction is towards this. So, what is the right hand side? This is the right hand side, and because of this, it deflects to the right hand side in this way. So, instead of flowing straight, it will pass this way. And similarly, in the southern hemisphere, what will be the direction of the wind? It should deflect to the left hand side. Now, see the direction of the arrow here. The direction of the arrow is pointing downwards. So, the left hand side is this. That is, if you stand this way towards your head to the direction of the arrow, the left side becomes this hand. So, the wind will deflect to the left hand side. So, this becomes the direction of the wind. Now, you know the name of a wind is given as per their directions. That is the source of origin. Now, where it is originating? It is originating from southwest in the southern hemisphere towards the, it is originating from northwest towards the southeast, or it is originating from southwest towards the northeast. That means it is originating from western direction and going towards the eastern direction. Such winds are known as westerly winds. So, these are the second type of a wind system, is the westerly wind system. Westerly wind system. And where do they originate? They originate in the subtropical high pressure belt, and in the previous lecture we have done that this belt is also known as Horses latitudes. So, what is a Horses latitudes? Horses latitude is a subtropical high pressure belt having calm conditions or absence of a strong winds. And why it was known as Horses latitude? Because during the older times, the merchants who used to travel through this region, this transition zone, they used to throw away their horses into the water. So the horses latitude is the zone of origin of two kinds of wind system. One, easterly winds which goes towards the equatorial low pressure belt, and the westerly winds which go towards the subpolar low pressure belt. Okay. And lastly, obviously this polar region is also an high pressure belt. So there should be some kind of a wind which, because of the high pressure belt. Why it is high pressure belt? Because of the extreme cold here. So there should be some kind of a wind which goes from this high pressure belt. Because it being high pressure belt, the wind is subsiding, and the wind after subsiding goes towards this low pressure belt, and after going to the low pressure belt, comparatively, as I told you, comparatively this यहाँ पे temperature is more than the polar region, therefore the wind becomes hot and the wind starts rising upwards. And after rising upwards, again the third cycle or the third cell is completed. Now the surface wind which blows from the polar high pressure belt to the subpolar low pressure belt. That means the surface wind which blows from this region to this, or from this region to this. And that means its direction is somewhat same to the west easterly winds. Because of the Coriolis force, these winds will now divert in this direction. Or they will divert in this direction. That is the polar high pressure belt. These winds are also known as easterly winds. But how to distinguish the name from this easterlies? There are two types of easterlies. So one are the tropical easterlies, and then the third kind of a wind here is polar easterly winds. Polar easterly winds. So what are the permanent winds? We have three different kind of permanent winds: tropical easterlies or the trade winds, westerlies, and the polar easterlies, out of which we are the most important from the exam point of view will be this three different kinds of an wind system. Okay. So we have this three wind system, and now we will study in detail, and I hope that you draw this diagram so that you will have a better understanding later on. And more importantly, because this is the most important topic, you write down what I am, or you try to jot down or again revise. After reading, you listen to this lecture very properly, and after again reading, you can again revise the lecture, this lecture series. Because obviously the attachments, my attachments are not coming regularly, but whenever I will be providing attachments, they won't be having that much enrichment as compared to the, because there are some limitations also in the attachments. So as a result of this, you will have to focus more on the lecture series and try to jot down, because even in the physical classes also, the classes are more enriching than the printed notes. Obviously you get the printed notes, but the kind of a quality material you get in the lecture is not as good as the is much better than the printed notes. So again, this kind of a wind system, I hope that you have understood what is the basic rule. Basic rule is the winds flow from high pressure belt to the low pressure belt, and then we have this different kinds of winds in the form of easterly winds and ITCZ, in the form of westerly winds and horses latitudes, and the third is polar easterlies wind. Now coming to the last part, see, in this zone, which we have already done in the previous lecture, in this zone there is convergence of two different kinds of a wind system, that is cold polar easterly winds and warm tropical westerly winds. in both the hemisphere. Warm tropical westerlies shown in the red color and cold polar easterlies shown in the blue color. As a result of this, there is a convergence, I told you, of two different wind systems having extremely different properties, and such a zone on the world is known as a frontal zone, resulting into formation of a temperate cyclone. So keep in mind, because we'll be studying after winds and humidity, we'll be studying the fronts. So what is a frontal zone and what is the importance of an frontal zone? It results into formation of an temperate cyclone. So these are the different kinds of wind system. Now coming to the trade winds.